The rain tapped softly against the windows of Park Minju's small apartment on the 42nd floor of Building C in Neo, Seoul. She sat in her favorite chair, the blue one with the worn armrests that her late husband Dong-hyun had bought 30 years ago. The news played quietly on the wall screen, but she was not really watching. Her eyes kept drifting to the empty chair across from her where Dong-hyun used to sit every evening. At 80 years old, Minju had lived through many changes. She remembered when cars still drove on roads instead of floating through the air. She remembered when people still used paper books instead of digital screens. But the hardest change had been learning to live alone after 60 years of marriage. The door chimed softly. Minju looked up and smiled. Only one person had the code to her apartment. "Grandma, I'm here," called a familiar voice. Kim Hyun-woo stepped through the door, shaking raindrops from his dark hair. At 32, he was tall and thin like his grandfather had been. He worked at the Galactic Species Exchange, a place where humans studied animals and plants from other worlds. It was important work, but Minju never quite understood all the details. "You're soaked," Minju said, getting up from her chair. "Let me get you a towel." "I'm fine, Grandma." Hyun-woo kicked off his shoes and followed her to the kitchen. "How have you been this week?" Minju handed him a warm towel. "The same as always. Mrs. Park from next door brought me some soup yesterday. The delivery man brought my groceries. I watched my shows." Hyun-woo dried his hair and looked at his grandmother with concern. She tried to sound cheerful, but he could hear the loneliness in her voice. She had been alone for 2 years now, since grandfather had passed away. Hyun-woo visited every week, but he knew it was not enough. "I brought you something," he said, pulling out his work tablet. "Want to see what came in today?" Minju's eyes lit up. She loved hearing about the strange creatures from other planets. Hyun-woo showed her pictures of rainbow-colored birds from Kepler 442b and tiny elephant-like animals from Proxima Centauri c. "This one is my favorite," he said, swiping to a new image. The picture showed a small creature no bigger than a house, cat. It had smooth scales that shimmered blue and green like ocean water. Its large golden eyes looked directly at the camera with an almost human expression of sadness. "Oh," Minju whispered, leaning closer. "What is it?" "The scientists call it a dracoling. It came from a place called the Draconis system, very far away." Hyun-woo paused. "It's just a baby. The adults sent a whole ship full of young ones to different planets. They said the babies needed new homes." "It looks so sad," Minju said, touching the screen gently. "This little one has been at the facility for 3 weeks. None of the other scientists want to study it because it just sits in its cage all day. It won't eat much. Dr. Kim thinks it might be sick, but all the tests say it's healthy." Minju studied the creature's golden eyes. Something about them reminded her of how she felt after Dong-hyun died. Lost, alone, waiting for someone to care. "Can I see it?" she asked. Hyun-woo looked surprised. "See it? Grandma, it's at my work. Civilians aren't allowed in the research areas." "Please," Minju said. "I want to meet this little one." 3 days later, Hyun-woo stood nervously outside the research facility's main entrance. His grandmother waited beside him, wearing her best coat and carrying a small bag of what she called meeting gifts, some fruit and homemade cookies. "Remember, we can only look," Hyun-woo said as they walked through the security gates. "No touching, no feeding. The rules are very strict." "I understand," Minju said, but her eyes were already searching for the creature she had seen in the picture. The research facility was a maze of white corridors and glass rooms. Scientists in long coats walked back and forth carrying tablets and talking in quiet voices. Minju felt out of place in her simple clothes, but she followed her grandson deeper into the building. "Here," Hyun-woo said, stopping in front of a large glass wall. "This is the Dracoling containment area." Minju looked through the glass into a room that tried to look like a forest. There were fake trees and soft grass, a small pond, and several caves where the creature could hide. But despite all the effort to make it comfortable, the Dracoling sat alone in the center of the room, its head down and its beautiful scales dull. "It looks even sadder in person," Minju whispered. As if it heard her voice, the creature lifted its head. Those golden eyes found hers through the glass, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly the Dracoling stood up and walked toward the glass wall. "That's strange," Hyunwoo said. "It usually hides when people come to look at it." The creature pressed itself against the glass, its small clawed hands touching the surface. It made a soft sound, almost like a cat purring, but deeper. Its eyes never left Minju's face. "Hello, little one," Minju said softly, pressing her hand against the glass where the creature's paw was. The Dracoling's purring got louder. Its scales began to shimmer brighter, the blue and green colors becoming more vivid. For the first time in weeks, it looked alive. "Grandma," Hyunwoo said, his voice full of amazement. "I've never seen it react to anyone like this." Other scientists began to gather around them. Dr. Bae Yunseo, the head of xenobiology, pushed through. "The crowd! What's happening here?" she demanded, then stopped when she saw the Dracoling. "Remarkable. It's been completely unresponsive until now." Minju didn't hear the conversation happening around her. She was focused on the small creature that seemed as lonely as she felt. In its golden eyes, she saw the same emptiness that looked back at her from the mirror every morning. "Can it understand me?" she asked. "We're not sure," Dr. Bae said. "The adult draconians are highly intelligent, but we don't know about the young ones." "You understand, don't you?" Minju said to the creature. "You miss your family. You don't know why you're here." The Dracoling pressed both paws against the glass and made a sound that was almost like crying. Its whole body seemed to droop with sadness. That night, Hyunwoo could not sleep. He kept thinking about his grandmother's face when she looked at the Dracoling. He had not seen her look so interested in anything since his grandfather died. And the way the creature had responded to her was unlike anything in his 5 years at the facility. The next morning, he made a decision that would change everything. He arrived at work early before the other scientists. He went to the Dracoling's room and opened the door. "Come on, little one," he whispered. "Let's go meet someone who needs a friend as much as you do." The creature looked at him with those intelligent golden eyes, then slowly walked forward. It seemed to understand that something important was about to happen. Hyunwoo had broken about 15 different regulations by the time he reached his grandmother's apartment. The Dracoling sat calmly in the carrying case, as if it knew exactly where it wanted to be. When Minju opened her door and saw the small, scaled creature looking up at her, her face lit up with the first real smile Hyunwoo had seen in 2 years. "Hello again, little one," she said, kneeling down as the creature stepped out of the case and walked straight to her. "Welcome home." The Dracoling pressed against her legs and began to purr, a sound of pure contentment. Minju gently stroked its smooth scales, and for the first time in months, her apartment did not feel empty. Neither of them knew that this moment would eventually shake the foundations of the galactic community. All they knew was that 2 lonely souls had finally found each other. 3 months had passed since Koma arrived at Park Minju's apartment. That was the name she had given the little creature, Koma, which meant little one in Korean. But the name was starting to seem less fitting with each passing day. Lee Soo-hyun noticed it first. She lived in the apartment next door and had become friends with Minju over the years. Every morning she would see Minju walking in the building's garden area with her new pet. At first, Koma had been small enough for Minju to carry in her arms. Now he walked beside her, his head reaching up to her waist. "That animal is growing very fast," Soo-hyun said to her husband Jin-ho one morning as they watched from their balcony. "When Mrs. Park got him, he was tiny. Look at him now." Jin-ho looked down at the garden where Minju was sitting on a bench while Kokoma played in the grass. The creature was now the size of a medium dog, but his movements were more graceful than any dog Jin-ho had ever seen. His scales caught the morning sunlight and threw back colors of blue and green and gold. "Maybe it's a growth spurt," Jin-ho said. "Some animals grow fast when they're young," but Soo-hyun was not convinced. She had raised 3 children and many pets over the years. She knew the difference between normal growth and something unusual. That afternoon, she knocked on Minju's door. She could hear sounds from inside, a low rumbling noise that was too deep to be from any normal pet. "Minju," she called. "It's Soo-hyun. Can I come in?" The door opened, and Minju smiled at her neighbor. "Of course. Come meet Koma properly." Soo-hyun stepped inside and stopped. The creature sitting in the living room was much larger than she had expected. Koma was now definitely bigger than a large dog. His scales had changed too. They were thicker now, more like armor than skin. When he turned to look at her, his golden eyes seemed to glow with an inner light. "Hello, Koma," Soo-hyun said carefully. The creature made that deep rumbling sound again. It was not aggressive, but it was powerful enough to make the windows vibrate slightly. "He's saying hello back," Minju said, sitting down beside Koma and scratching behind what looked like small horns growing from his head. "He's very polite. Always greets visitors properly." Soo-hyun sat down slowly. Up close, she could see that Koma's claws had grown longer and sharper. His teeth, when he yawned, were definitely not the teeth of any earth animal she knew. "Minju," she said gently, "what exactly is Kokoma? I mean, what kind of animal?" "Hyun-woo said he's a therapy pet," Minju replied, stroking Kokoma's neck. "Very rare, from another planet. He's supposed to help lonely old people feel better, and—" "Does he? Help you feel better?" Minju's face lit up. "Oh yes, I haven't felt this happy in years. He's such good company. He listens when I talk, and he follows me around the apartment. At night, he sleeps by my bed and keeps me safe." As if he understood, Kokoma made a softer rumbling sound and nuzzled against Minju's hand. Later that week, Soo-hyun noticed something else strange. A delivery drone approached their building carrying packages for various residents. As it flew toward the landing platform, Koma appeared on Minju's balcony. The creature stood perfectly still, watching the drone with intense focus. The drone's sensors must have detected something unusual, because it suddenly changed course and flew away without delivering any packages. Soo-hyun watched Koma pace back and forth on the balcony until the drone was completely out of sight. This happened 3 more times over the next week. No delivery drones would come near the building. The delivery company started using human drivers instead, but even they seemed nervous when they entered the building. Meanwhile, at the Galactic Species Exchange, Hyun-woo was having problems of his own. Dr. Bae had noticed that one of the Dracolings was missing from the facility. There were supposed to be 15 creatures from the Draconis system. Now there were only 14. "Someone must have made a mistake in the count," Dr. Kim suggested during the morning meeting. But Dr. Bae was suspicious. She pulled up the security recordings from the past few months. After hours of reviewing footage, she found what she was looking for. There was Hyun-woo, arriving early one morning and leaving with a carrying case that had not been there when he arrived. She called him into her office that afternoon. "Hyun-woo," she said, showing him the security footage on her computer screen. "Do you have anything you want to tell me?" Hyun-woo's face turned pale. He had known this day would come, but he had hoped it would be later, much later. "Dr. Bae, I can explain. I hope so, because stealing a research specimen is a serious crime, even if the specimen is just a small, harmless creature." Hyun-woo took a deep breath. "My grandmother was very lonely, Since my grandfather died, she barely leaves her apartment. She wasn't eating well, she wasn't taking care of herself. When I saw how the Dracoling responded to her, I thought, you thought you would steal it and give it to your grandmother, as a pet. Yes. Dr. Bay stared at him for a long moment. Hyunwoo, do you have any idea what you've done? I've helped two lonely beings find each other. You've given your elderly grandmother a baby dragon. Hyunwoo blinked. A what? Dr. Bay turned her computer screen toward him. On it was a file marked, Classified, Level 7, Access Only. The Draconians are not just intelligent animals, Hyunwoo. They're one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. The adults can fly through space without ships. They can breathe plasma hot enough to melt steel. They have psychic abilities that can affect entire planets. Hyunwoo felt his legs go weak. But the little one is so gentle. He would never hurt. My grandmother. The little ones are gentle because they haven't matured yet. But when they do mature... Dr. Bay pulled up another file. A young Draconian's first adult vocalization can shatter glass for miles around. Their protective instincts become incredibly strong. If your grandmother is in any danger, that creature will defend her with the full power of its species. How long do we have? Draconians mature at different rates depending on their environment. In the wild, it takes about 5 years. But in a bonded situation, with constant emotional stimulation, she paused. It could happen much faster. That evening, Hyunwoo sat in his car outside his grandmother's building. He had been there for an hour, trying to work up the courage to go upstairs. How could he tell her that her beloved pet was actually a baby dragon that might level half the city when it grew up? His phone buzzed, a text message from his grandmother. Coma and I made your favorite soup. Come up for dinner. Through the window of her apartment, he could see warm light and the shadows of his grandmother and Coma moving around the kitchen. It looked so peaceful, so normal. But as he watched, he saw Coma's shadow pause near the window. The creature seemed to be looking directly at him, even though he was 42 floors down and across the street. Those golden eyes, even in shadow, seemed to glow. Hyunwoo's phone buzzed again. Another message. Coma says you're worried about something. Come talk to us. How could the creature possibly know he was there? How could it know he was worried? With a sinking feeling in his stomach, Hyunwoo realized that Dr. Bay might be right about the psychic abilities. And if Coma was already showing signs of adult draconian powers, then they might have less time than anyone thought. He got out of his car and walked toward the building. Whatever happened next, he could not let his grandmother face it alone. She had given Coma a home and love when no one else would. Now it was time to find out if that love would be enough to keep them all safe. As he entered the building, he heard a sound from high above. It was deep and musical, like singing, but in a language he did not understand. It was beautiful and powerful, and just a little bit frightening. Coma was calling to him, welcoming him home. But in that call, Hyunwoo could hear the first hints of something much larger and more dangerous than the small creature he had smuggled out of the research facility 3 months ago. The real test was just beginning. Choi Min-hyuk had been watching Building C for 3 weeks. He knew which apartments had old people living alone. He knew which ones had expensive things worth stealing. And he knew that most elderly people kept their doors locked, but their windows poorly secured. At 28 years old, Min-hyuk had been breaking into apartments for 5 years. He was good at it. He was quiet, careful, and smart enough to avoid places with security systems or big dogs. Old people were his favorite targets because they slept deeply and moved slowly. Tonight, he had chosen apartment 4215. The old woman who lived there was alone, and his research showed she had a grandson who worked at some fancy science place. Science people made good money, which meant they bought nice gifts for their grandmothers. Min-hyuk climbed up the building's maintenance ladder to the 42nd floor. The rain from earlier had stopped, but the metal rungs were still slippery. He moved carefully, his plasma cutter and other tools secured in his backpack. The window to apartment 4215 was exactly where he expected it to be. Through the glass, he could see a dark living room with expensive-looking furniture. Perfect. He activated his plasma cutter and began working on the window lock. The tool made almost no noise as it cut through the metal. Within minutes, he had the window open and was climbing inside. The apartment was quiet except for the soft sound of someone sleeping in the bedroom. Min-hyuk smiled and began looking around. There was a nice wall screen, some jewelry on a table, and what looked like real paper books that collectors paid good money for. He was reaching for a small silver box when he heard something that made him freeze, breathing, deep, slow breathing that was too big to come from an old woman. Min-hyuk turned around slowly. In the corner of the living room, something large was watching him. At first, he thought it might be a big dog sleeping on a cushion, but as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realized this was no dog. The creature was huge, easily the size of a small horse. Its body was covered in scales that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light from the window. But it was the eyes that made Min-hyuk's blood turn cold. Golden eyes that glowed like small suns, eyes that looked at him with an intelligence that was definitely not animal. "Nice doggy," Min-hyuk whispered, even though he knew this was not a dog. The creature stood up slowly. It was even bigger than Min-hyuk had thought. Its head nearly touched the ceiling, and its claws scraped softly against the floor as it moved. From the bedroom came a sleepy voice. "Coma? What's wrong, little one?" The creature, Coma, never took its eyes off Min-hyuk, but it made a sound in response to the old woman's voice. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr, something deeper and more complex. "I'm coming," the woman called. Min-hyuk knew he should run. Every instinct told him to dive back through the window and climb down the building as fast as possible. But he was frozen in place by those golden eyes that seemed to see right through him. The bedroom door opened, and light spilled into the living room. Park Minju appeared, wearing a blue nightgown and slippers. She looked tiny compared to the massive creature beside her. "Oh," she said when she saw Min-hyuk. "Hello. Are you lost?" Min-hyuk stared at her. She was not screaming. She was not running. She was talking to him like he was a neighbor who had wandered into the wrong apartment. He started to say. That was when Coma decided the stranger was a threat. The sound that came from the creature was unlike anything Min-hyuk had ever heard. It was not a roar, though it had the power of one behind it. It was not a scream, though. It pierced through his skull like one. It was somewhere between a bark and a sonic boom, filled with harmonics that seemed to come from another dimension entirely. The sound wave hit Min-hyuk like a physical force, but more than that, it hit his mind. Images flashed through his consciousness, vast star fields, beings of incredible power, civilizations that spanned galaxies. And through it all, a message that his brain could barely process. "This human is under my protection." The windows in the apartment did not just break. They exploded outward in a shower of sparkling fragments. The sound wave continued beyond the apartment, shattering every piece of glass in the building. Car windows in the parking area below burst simultaneously. Windows in the neighboring buildings cracked and fell. The wave kept spreading. 3 blocks away, shopkeepers would later find their display windows reduced to glittering piles on the sidewalk. Electronic devices flickered and died. Car alarms began wailing across the entire district. Deep underground, seismic sensors registered what appeared to be a small earthquake centered on Building C. But in the apartment where it all started, Park Minju stood calmly beside her pet, completely unaffected by the sound that had shattered glass for miles around. "Now look what you've done, little one," she said gently, reaching up to pat Coma's massive head. "We'll have to pay for all those windows." Coma made a softer sound, almost apologetic. His golden eyes had stopped glowing, and he lowered his head so Minju could scratch behind his horns. Min-hyuk was still standing in the same spot, but everything about him had changed. His eyes were wide and blank, staring at nothing. His mouth hung open slightly, and his hands trembled like leaves in the wind. "Are you all right, dear?" Minju asked him. "You look a bit pale." Min-hyuk did not answer, could not answer. His mind was trying to process what he had experienced, but it was too much. Images of cosmic powers and ancient civilizations kept flashing behind his eyes, and underneath it all, the knowledge that he had just tried to rob someone under the protection of a being that could probably destroy planets if it wanted to. "I should call my grandson," Minju said. "He'll know what to do about the windows. And I suppose we should call someone about you, too. Though I'm not sure who handles this sort of thing." She walked to the kitchen to get her phone, stepping carefully around the broken glass. Koma followed her, moving with surprising grace for something so large. Neither of them seemed particularly concerned about the man standing frozen in their living room. Outside, sirens were beginning to wail as emergency services responded to what they assumed was some kind of explosion. Police cars and fire trucks raced through the streets, their drivers confused by the reports they were receiving. Every window in a 3-block radius just exploded simultaneously, one dispatcher reported to another. "No signs of bombing or attack, no radiation, no chemical traces, just broken glass everywhere." "Any casualties?" "One person found in apartment 4215 where it seems to have started. Male, mid-20s, appears to be in shock. No physical injuries, but he keeps talking about golden fire and cosmic dragons. We're sending him for psychological evaluation." In the apartment, Minju had reached Hyunwoo on the phone. "Grandson," she said, "I think Koma might have had his first real bark tonight. Could you come over? We have a bit of a mess to clean up." Hyunwoo, who had been watching the news reports about mysterious explosions across the city, closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "I'll be right there, Grandma," he said. When he arrived 20 minutes later, he found his grandmother sweeping broken glass while Kakoma sat nearby, looking somewhat embarrassed. The burglar had been taken away by paramedics, still muttering about golden fire and the vast emptiness between stars. "He seems like such a nice young man," Minju said about the burglar. "I hope he feels better soon. Perhaps he was just hungry." "People do strange things when they're hungry." Hyunwoo looked at his grandmother, then at Koma, who was now definitely too large to be called a little one anymore. The creature looked back at him with those intelligent golden eyes, and Hyunwoo could swear he saw something like an apology in them. "Grandma," he said carefully, "I think we need to have a talk about Kakoma, about what he really is." But before Minju could answer, her phone rang again. This time it was building security, and then the police, and then several government agencies that Hyunwoo had never heard of. The secret was out. There was no hiding what had happened tonight. And somewhere in the city, officials were already making plans to deal with what they assumed was a dangerous alien creature. They had no idea they were about to meet the most polite dragon in the galaxy, or the grandmother who had raised him. General Nam Jae-hoon had dealt with many strange situations in his 30 years with Earth Defense Command. He had negotiated with alien diplomats, handled first contact protocols, and managed several minor interplanetary incidents. But he had never been called out at 3 in the morning to deal with a grandmother and her pet. The reports made no sense. Every window in a 3-block radius had been shattered by what appeared to be a single sound wave. The epicenter was traced to apartment 4215 in Building C, occupied by an 80-year-old woman named Park Minju. Witnesses described seeing a large creature in her apartment, but their descriptions varied wildly. Some said it was a giant dog. Others insisted it was some kind of dinosaur. One person claimed it was a small dragon, but that person was currently under psychiatric evaluation. "Sir," Lieutenant Park Jae-ho reported as they approached the building, "we've evacuated the surrounding area and set up a perimeter. The creature is still inside the apartment with the elderly woman." "Any signs of aggression?" General Nam asked. None, sir. In fact, the woman refused to leave her apartment. She said she needed to clean up the mess before her grandson arrived. General Nam raised an eyebrow. A creature powerful enough to shatter windows for blocks around, and the woman was worried about cleaning up. Dr. Bai Yunzeo stepped out of the command vehicle carrying a tablet full of xenobiology equipment readings. She had been called in as the expert on alien species, though she had not told anyone yet that she suspected exactly what they were dealing with. "The energy readings are incredible," she said to General Nam. "Whatever made that sound wave has power levels comparable to a small starship engine, but it's biological, not mechanical." "How dangerous are we talking about?" Dr. Bay hesitated. "If my suspicions are correct, very dangerous, but also possibly very friendly depending on how it's been treated." They took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The hallway was littered with broken glass from the apartment doors' windows, but otherwise looked normal. At the end of the hall, apartment 4215's door stood open. General Nam approached carefully, his hand on his weapon. Through the doorway, he could hear the soft sound of sweeping and a woman's voice talking gently to something. "I know you didn't mean to make such a mess, little one, but we really must be more careful. The neighbors will complain." The voice that answered was deep and musical, definitely not human, but it sounded apologetic rather than threatening. General Nam stepped through the doorway and stopped. In the living room, an elderly woman in a blue nightgown was sweeping broken glass into a dustpan. Beside her sat the largest creature he had ever seen indoors. The being was easily 8 feet long and 4 feet tall at the shoulder. Its body was covered in scales that shifted between blue, green, and gold as it moved. Small horns decorated its head, and its eyes glowed with a gentle golden light. Despite its size and obvious power, it was carefully using one claw to hold a dustpan steady while the woman swept. "Oh. Hello," Minju said, looking up at the group of armed officials in her doorway. "Are you here about the windows? I'm terribly sorry about that. Koma is still learning to control his voice." The creature, Koma, looked at the newcomers with interest, but no fear. It made a sound that was clearly a greeting, though General Nam felt his bones vibrate from the resonance. "Ma'am," General Nam said carefully, "I'm General Nam from Earth. Defense Command. We need to ask you some questions about your pet." "Pet?" Minju laughed. "Oh, Kakoma isn't a pet. He's family. Aren't you, little one?" Kakoma made another sound, this one clearly affectionate. He gently nuzzled against Minju's shoulder, and she reached up to scratch behind his horns. Dr. Bay stepped forward, her scanner beeping rapidly. "Ma'am, do you know what species your companion is?" "My grandson said he's a therapy animal from another planet. Very rare. He helps lonely old people feel better." Minju smiled at Koma. "And he does. I haven't been lonely since he came to live with me." Dr. Bay looked at her readings and felt her heart race. The biological signatures were exactly what she had feared. This was definitely a draconian, and not a young one anymore. Based on the energy readings, it was approaching full maturity. "General," she said quietly, "we need to talk privately." But before General Nam could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Hyun-woo appeared in the doorway looking tired and worried. "Grandma, are you okay?" He stopped when he saw the armed officials surrounding his grandmother. "What's going on?" "These nice people came to ask about the windows," Minju said. "I told them it was an accident." Hyun-woo looked at Dr. Bay, and she saw the recognition in his eyes. He knew exactly what coma was, and he knew they were all in serious trouble. "Dr. Bay," he said carefully, "I can explain." "You'd better," General Nam said. "Because right now, I have reports of a creature capable of causing citywide property damage, and it's sitting in an apartment with a civilian." "He would never hurt me," Minju said firmly. "Koma is the gentlest soul I've ever met." As if to prove her point, Koma carefully picked up a piece of broken glass in his claws and dropped it into the dustpan. His movements were precise and delicate, showing incredible control over his strength. Dr. Bay watched this display with growing amazement. Adult draconians were supposed to be nearly impossible to control. They were proud, independent beings who submitted to no authority except their own kind. Yet here was one acting like a devoted family member, helping with household chores. "Ma'am," she said to Minju, "how long have you had Koma?" "About 4 months now. He was so small when Hyunwoo brought him to me, no bigger than a house cat. But he's grown so fast." Minju looked fondly at the massive creature. "Haven't you, little one?" Koma made a sound that was clearly agreement, and gently pressed his head against Minju's hand. General Nam was beginning to understand that this situation was far more complex than his briefing had suggested. The creature was obviously powerful. The evidence was scattered in glass fragments throughout the district, but it was also obviously bonded to the elderly woman in a way that seemed protective rather than possessive. "Dr. Bay," he said, "I need a full explanation. What exactly are we dealing with?" Dr. Bay took a deep breath. "General, this is a draconian. They're one of the most powerful species in the known galaxy. Adults can survive in space, breathe plasma hot enough to melt starship hulls, and have psychic abilities that can affect entire populations." General Nam felt the blood drain from his face. "And we have one sitting in an apartment in downtown Neo-Seoul." "Yes, but," Dr. Bay continued, watching Koma carefully stack broken glass pieces, "I've never seen behavior like this. Draconians are supposed to be impossible to domesticate. They're proud warriors, not house pets." "I told you," Minju said. "He's not a pet, he's family." She walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a photo album. "Look, I'll show you." To everyone's amazement, Koma immediately moved to sit beside the coffee table. Minju sat next to him and opened the album. The massive creature leaned over carefully, his golden eyes focused on the pages. "This is my late husband, Dong-Hyun," Minju said, pointing to a picture. "And this is our wedding day. Koma loves looking at the old pictures." Koma made a soft sound and gently touched the page with the tip of one claw, being incredibly careful not to damage the photo. "He's very good about not drooling on them," Minju added proudly. Dr. Bay stared in fascination. This was unprecedented. A fully grown draconian was sitting calmly, looking at family photos like any devoted grandchild might do. "Ma'am, General," Nam said, "I think you should know that your Koma is not exactly a therapy pet. He's what we might call a living weapon." "Nonsense," Minju said firmly. "Koma is gentle and kind. He brings me my slippers every morning and makes sure I take my medicine. He even learned to change the channels on the wall screen for me." As if to demonstrate, Koma reached out with one claw and carefully pressed a button on the remote control. The wall screen turned on to Minju's favorite morning show. General Nam looked at his team, then back at the impossible scene before him. A creature that could probably level city blocks was using a television remote with the delicacy of a master craftsman. "Dr. Bay," he said quietly, "what do we do about this?" Before Dr. Bay could answer, Koma's head suddenly snapped up. His eyes began to glow brighter, and a low rumble came from his throat. He moved protectively in front of Minju, his attention focused on the apartment's open door. "What is it, little one?" Minju asked. Through the doorway came the sound of heavy footsteps, multiple sets, moving with military precision. "Sir," Lieutenant Park's voice crackled through General Nam's communicator, "we have a problem. A ship just landed on the building's roof, a big one, and it's not from Earth." General Nam closed his eyes. This night was about to get much more complicated. Koma's rumble grew deeper, but he did not move away from Minju. Whatever was coming, he was ready to defend his family. And for the first time since arriving, General Nam realized that having a dragon on their side might not be a bad thing. Captain Ray Jae-won had been expecting a normal diplomatic mission when his ship received the emergency transmission from the Draconian fleet. Instead, he found himself landing on a residential building in Neo Sol at 4 in the morning, carrying the most important message in galactic history. The massive Draconian ship that followed his small diplomatic vessel could not land on Earth. It was too large, built for beings who measured their personal space in kilometers rather than meters. So it waited in orbit, while 3 adult Draconians used smaller transport pods to reach the surface. Captain Ray had met Draconians before, but never in such an unusual situation. The 3 beings that emerged from the transport pods were each easily 30 feet long, with scales that seemed to contain entire star systems within their depths. Their eyes glowed like small suns, and when they spoke, their voices carried harmonics that human ears could barely process. The largest of the 3 introduced herself through the translation device as Pyrith Magna, which roughly translated to Fire Who Protects the Young. She was a Draconian matriarch, one of the most senior members of their species. "We have come because of the youngling," she said, her translated words somehow still carrying the weight of centuries. "The one you call Kokoma." General Nam, who was beginning to feel very small in the presence of beings who could probably eat his command vehicle as a snack, nodded carefully. "The creature is in the building below us with its human caretaker." Caretaker? The second Draconian, introduced as Veltharos, Storm Who Remembers, made a sound that the translator rendered as surprised amusement. "Humans do not take care of our young. It is impossible." "With respect," Captain Ray said, "you might want to see this for yourselves." They had set up a video link to the apartment below, where the most bizarre domestic scene in galactic history was playing out. Park Minju was making breakfast, while Koma sat patiently at the kitchen table, wearing what appeared to be a large napkin around his neck. "Now remember," Minju was saying as she put a plate of food in front of him, "chew slowly. Last time you ate too fast and had hiccups, and you nearly melted the refrigerator." Koma made a careful sound of agreement and began eating with delicate precision, using his claws like chopsticks. The 3 adult Draconians stared at the screen in absolute silence. "This is not possible," Pyrith Magna finally said. "Young Draconians cannot be controlled. They are too powerful, too wild. They must be raised in isolation until they learn discipline, or they destroy everything around them." "How long does that usually take?" Dr. Bay asked. "Many years, sometimes decades, and even then many never learn proper control. They become outcasts, dangerous to themselves and others." On the screen, Koma had finished his breakfast and was now helping Minju wash the dishes. He held each plate steady while she scrubbed, his massive claws gentle enough to handle delicate china. "Your species," Veltharos said slowly, "has done something we thought impossible." The 3rd Draconian, who had been introduced as Quintelesh, wisdom born of stars, leaned closer to the screen. "Show us more," she requested. Captain Ray switched to the recordings from the night before when the authorities had first arrived. The 3 Draconians watched in growing amazement as Minju calmly swept broken glass while Koma helped as she showed him family photos as he gently used the television remote. The protective response was appropriate, Pyrith Magna noted when they saw the footage of Kokoma's reaction to the burglar. The youngling correctly identified a threat to his bonded human and responded with measured force. The intruder was neutralized, but not killed. "Measured force?" General Nam asked. "He shattered every window in 3 city blocks. For a young Draconian responding to a threat against a bonded being, that was extremely restrained," Quintelesh explained. "A typical response would have leveled the entire structure." Dr. Bay looked up from her notes. "You keep saying bonded. What exactly does that mean?" The 3 Draconians exchanged what appeared to be meaningful looks, though it was hard to tell with beings whose faces were the size of small vehicles. "Among our kind," Pyrith Magna said, "bonding is sacred. It is the deepest connection one being can have with another. We bond with mates, with offspring, with those we choose as family. But we have never successfully bonded with another species. Until now, Veltheros added, watching as the screen showed Koma carefully arranging flowers in a vase for Minju. This changes everything, Quintalesh said. If humans can successfully raise our young, can provide the emotional stability they need to mature safely. She did not finish the sentence, but everyone understood the implications. The Draconians were one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, but they had always struggled with raising their own children. Too many young Draconians grew up damaged by isolation, never learning to control their abilities properly. There's something else, Dr. Bay said hesitantly. The reports say that Mrs. Park was completely unaffected by Koma's sonic burst last night. Everyone else in the area was stunned or disoriented, but she just kept sweeping. The bond protects both parties, Pyrith Magna explained. The human provides emotional stability for the youngling. In return, the youngling's psychic field shields the human from harm. Captain Ray was beginning to understand the magnitude of what they were witnessing. How many young Draconians are there who need homes? Thousands, Veltheros said sadly. We sent them to many worlds when the Void Swarm attacked our colonies. Most worlds cannot handle them. They are returned to us as failures, more damaged than when they left. But this one, Quintalesh said, gesturing to the screen where Koma was now reading a book alongside Minju, carefully turning pages with his claw tips. This one is thriving. On the screen, Minju looked up at the camera that she did not know was there. Koma, dear, could you turn the page? This story is getting exciting. Koma made a gentle sound and carefully flipped to the next page, his massive head leaning close, to follow along with the text. We need to study this, Pyrith Magna declared. If humans can truly raise our young successfully, it could save both our species. Both species? General Nam asked. The Void Swarm is still out there, Veltheros explained. They consume entire worlds, turning everything into crystalline husks. We have been fighting them for centuries, but we are losing. Too many of our warriors are damaged, unstable. They fight bravely, but without discipline. But warriors raised with human emotional support, Quintalesh said thoughtfully, warriors who learned control and love before they learned to fight. They would be unstoppable, Pyrith Magna finished. Dr. Bay felt a chill run down her spine. You're talking about creating an army. We are talking about saving civilizations, Veltheros corrected. The Void Swarm has already consumed 47 worlds in this galaxy. They will not stop until everything is dead crystal. General Nam looked at the screen where Minju was now knitting while Koma dozed beside her chair, his breathing creating a gentle rumble that seemed to fill the apartment with contentment. What are you proposing exactly? He asked. Pyrith Magna turned her massive head to look at him directly. A partnership. We provide younglings who need homes. You provide humans who need companions. Together, we raise a generation of Draconians who are both powerful and stable. And in return, when the Void Swarm reaches this sector of the galaxy, you will have protectors who love this world as much as you do, because it will be their home too. Captain Ray thought about all the lonely, elderly people he knew, all the nursing homes, and empty apartments where people waited for visitors who rarely came. Then he thought about young dragons who needed families, who could provide both companionship and protection. There would have to be safeguards, General Nam said. Training programs, careful matching of humans and younglings. Of course, Quintalesh agreed. We would not repeat the mistakes of the past. Every placement would be monitored, every bond nurtured. On the screen, Minju had finished her knitting and was showing Koma what appeared to be a small blanket in his favorite colors of blue and green. The massive dragon examined it carefully, then made a sound of pure joy and gently nuzzled against her shoulder. She made that for him, Dr. Bay realized. She knitted a blanket for a dragon. And he treasures it, Pyrith Magna observed, because it was made with love. The room fell silent as everyone watched Minju carefully drape the small blanket over one of Koma's arms. It looked ridiculous, a tiny piece of fabric on a creature the size of a small car. But Koma wore it like it was the most precious thing in the universe. "When do we start?" General Nam asked. The answer came not from the Draconians, but from the communication system connecting them to the apartment below. Minju's voice, speaking to someone off camera. "Oh, Hyunwoo, there you are. Koma and I were just talking about how nice it would be if he had some friends to play with. Do you think there might be other little ones who need homes?" Everyone looked at everyone else, and Captain Ray realized that the most important interspecies alliance in galactic history had just been decided by a grandmother who wanted her dragon to have playmates. Some decisions, he thought, made themselves. 6 months later, Park Minju's apartment building looked very different from the outside. The structure had been reinforced with materials that could withstand dragon breath, and the windows were made of transparent aluminum that could survive sonic booms. What had once been a simple residential building was now the most secure location in Neo Seoul, but inside, it felt like home. Minju walked down the expanded hallway, greeting her neighbors as she went. Mrs. Kim from apartment 4220 was teaching her young draconian Baram how to fold laundry. The dragon, still only the size of a large dog, was concentrating very hard on not putting his claws through the delicate fabric. "Good morning, Minju," Mrs. Kim called. "Baram learned a new word yesterday. Show her, dear one." Baram looked up and made a careful sound that the translation device rendered as, "Hello, grandmother who is loved by Koma." Minju smiled. The young dragons had their own language, but they were learning human words too, and they seemed to have their own names for all the humans in the building. In apartment 4225, she could hear Mr. Lee singing an old folk song while his dragon, Hanul, provided a low harmonic backing. Hanel had been with Mr. Lee for 4 months now, and the old man had not been to the doctor once since then. His dragon's protective psychic field seemed to keep him healthier and happier than he had been in years. Minju reached apartment 4230 and knocked gently. "Young Ho, are you ready for today's lesson?" Her great-nephew opened the door, surrounded by floating holographic screens covered with notes and diagrams. Park Young-ho was 25 years old and studying xenopsychology at Seoul University. His thesis on human draconian bonding was being read by scientists across the galaxy. "Almost ready, Great Aunt," he said. "I just finished analyzing yesterday's interaction data. The emotional stability readings are incredible." Through the window, Minju could see the building's garden area, where a dozen young dragons were playing under the supervision of their human companions. The sight would have terrified most people 6 months ago. Now it just looked like a very unusual day at the park. Kakoma was easy to spot among the group. He was the largest, nearly full-grown now, but he was being incredibly gentle with the smaller dragons. He had appointed himself as their big brother and took the job very seriously. "The news crews are here again," Young-ho said, pointing to the street below where several hover vans had gathered. "Everyone wants to interview the dragon grandmother," Minju sighed. Ever since the story had spread beyond Earth, she had become something of a celebrity. The woman who had tamed the first dragon, the grandmother who had started an interstellar alliance. She found it all a bit silly. She had just given a lonely creature a home, the same way she might have adopted a stray cat. "Are the new families arriving today?" she asked. "Yes. 12 more elderly volunteers from around the world, and 12 more young dragons from the Draconian fleet," Dr. Bay says. "These will be the largest dragons placed so far. Some of them are nearly as big as Koma was when he first arrived." Minju nodded. The program had grown quickly once word spread. Lonely elderly people from every continent had volunteered to take in young dragons. The waiting list was now over, 1,000 names long. Her phone chimed with a message from Captain Ray. "Transport arriving in 1 hour. Are you ready for the ceremony?" Today was special. The first group of human-raised dragons had reached full maturity, and the draconian matriarchs were coming to officially recognize them as adults. It was a ceremony that had never been performed with non-draconians present before. Minju walked down to the garden area where Koma was teaching a young dragon named Gur.